Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good evening, friends. So this evening is going to be slightly different from the kind of talks I normally give because I have notes. So normally I never have notes, but today I have notes. I think I was saying earlier that this is perhaps the second time in my entire monastic life that I've brought notes to give to a Dhamma talk that I'm giving. But this evening it's important because there's a number of points that I want to make sure get sufficiently explained in order to bring forward the point that needs to be made. So the title of this talk was Ideal Conditions. And the reason why I chose to call it that is because it's important to recognize that in practicing the Dhamma, there are some conditions that are suitable and some that are not. There are some that are supportive and some that are unsupportive. And under most conditions in samsara, enlightenment is next to impossible. Under most conditions, the chance of attaining enlightenment is close to zero. And traditionally, it's actually said in the lower realms, which means every realm lower than human, that it's effectively impossible. So while it's theoretically possible for any sentient being to attain awakening, realistically, every being lower than a human has such a ridiculously tiny chances to be effectively zero. So animals, no. And everything below animals, so the domain of ghosts, the domain of the various beings living in states of misery and torment in the hell realms, they have effectively zero chance. So it's really important to make sure that we stay out of the lower realms. So this is one reason why the Buddha did put quite a bit of importance on cultivating ordinary good karma, worldly good karma. Because ordinary worldly good karma is what prevents us from being reborn in the lower realms. Ordinary worldly good karma is what makes sure that we're born as humans or as devas. So either in the human realm or in the heaven realms. And make sure that we don't wind up in the lower realms. This is very important also because once one is in the lower realms, it's extremely difficult to get reborn in any of the higher realms. There's a number of suttas where the Buddha gives similes to explain how difficult it is for an animal to be reborn as a human. Or for a being in the lower realms to be reborn as a human. So one of the most well-known similes is the simile of the blind turtle. So a blind turtle swimming around in the ocean, and it comes to the surface once every 100 years. And floating on the surface of the ocean is a plank of wood with a single hole in it, just big enough for a turtle to stick its head through. So the chance of an animal being reborn as a human is like the chance of that blind turtle coming to the surface and totally randomly by chance just happening to stick its head through the hole in that piece of wood. Pretty bad odds. So we want to make very sure that we stay out of the animal realms because it's pretty much hopeless down there. Not quite hopeless, but usually, once you wind up in the lower realms, you're there for a very, 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 very long time before eventually you manage to scrape together the good karma necessary to wind up as a human. So, and above the human realm, we have the Deva realms. It is possible for Devas to attain enlightenment, and there are many accounts in the suttas of Devas attaining enlightenment. Usually the lower devas, the ones that are close to the human realm, the ones that are not so different from humans. So earth devas, the devas of the 4 great kings, the devas of the Tavatimsa heaven, the heaven of the 33, the devas of the Tusita heaven. These devas are recorded as attaining enlightenment from time to time. It does happen. Usually through listening to the teachings of a Sammasambuddha, but then realistically that's one's best chance at getting awakened anyway, is through being in the presence of a Sammasambuddha who can give instructions. As you go up the realm, though, the rungs into the higher heaven realms, though, it becomes less likely. They're too distant from the human realm. They're too caught up in their own experiences, in their own inner world. And the highest heaven realms are beings who are completely introverted, to the point where they don't interact with other beings at all for the duration of their lifespan. So those beings have no chance of hearing the Dhamma, no chance of practicing the way to awakening until they're reborn in a lower realm. So recognizing that there are conditions and circumstances which make it easier to practice the Dhamma and progress towards awakening. And optimally, we're shooting for the human realm or one of the lower Deva realms. That's where chances are the best. Then also we want to be born at a time and place where the Dhamma is available. Again, this is not terribly common. For most of the time, the teachings of enlightenment are not known. Often little fragments and bits and pieces are there, but the complete detailed path is only available on very rare occasion. So right now we're 2,500 years after a Sammasambuddha, so we still have the teachings. Some of it's a little bit muddled and confusing at this point, because what tends to happen is that over time, the transmission of the Dhamma degrades. Kind of like when you keep making a copy of a piece of paper and you make a copy of the copy and 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 a copy of the copy, then gradually it degrades. It becomes harder to discern what the message is. Or playing the game of telephone. As you might recall from when you were children, the game of telephone. So I whisper a message in Bhante Sumano's ear, and then he whispers it in Bhante Kumoto's ear, and then he whispers it in Bhante Jayasara's ear, and so on. And after it goes through about 15 or 20 people, sometimes the message has changed quite dramatically. So I personally believe that the Buddha Dhamma that we have available these days is still pretty good. But you can tell that there's been some editing and alteration and adjustment over the years. Some things have been added, some things have been removed, some things have been altered. So as that continues to happen over a period of time, then the message can get lost. And of course, things can be lost in more ordinary ways. So records can be lost, books can be burned, computer mainframes can be wiped out, people can forget. So the Dhamma lasts for a while and then it disappears. So ideal is to be born at a time and place when the Dhamma is available. And it's also necessary to have a mind which is capable of understanding the Dhamma. So if we're born with severe mental illness, or if we're born with very strong craving, or very strong delusion, or very strong aversion, very strong attachments, such as attachments to cats, or attachment to family, or attachment to sensuality, then those are all conditions which make it very difficult to attain awakening. Another example, by the way, would be being born in a strong, close-knit family, which does not want you to become ordained. That would also be a bad condition, an afflictive condition. So recognizing the importance of conditions, supportive conditions. So having a sharp, alert, intelligent mind, having relatively good physical health. There's a number of places in the suttas where the Buddha emphasizes this. He says it's easy to practice when you have good health, It's hard to practice when you have bad health. So also aspiring to have good health, aspiring to have supportive friends and family who want you to practice. Having a sharp, intelligent mind so you can understand the teachings. Having the capacity for serenity. So having a certain inclination towards peacefulness and serenity. Having a flexible mind. These are all important qualities, important conditions. Having sufficient opportunity. So somebody who's working 3 jobs, 80 hours a week, they don't really have much opportunity for practicing the Dhamma. They don't have much opportunity for study, much opportunity for meditation, much opportunity to spend time at the monastery. Or someone who's born into slavery, or somebody who's imprisoned at an early age, or somebody who's forced into government service. There can be a lot of different conditions which are very counterproductive. So it's important to make sure that we're avoiding all of those conditions as well. And of course, the ideal condition is actually to be born in the time and place of a living Sammasambuddha. That's ideal. That's not what we have right now. So of course, it's good to make do with what we have right now. So right now, if we have conditions in which we can understand the Dhamma at least a little bit and practice at least a little bit, then we should do the best with what we have. And of course, if we do have the opportunity to attain awakening in this lifetime, we should go for it. We should make an effort. Because we can't be sure when this opportunity is going to come around again. However, it's always important to still have that backup plan of, well, if I can't make it in this life, then I should aspire to have the right conditions for practicing in future lives. And that's the main thing that I wanted to talk about this evening, is always keeping in mind, as much as I aspire to attain awakening in this lifetime, it's not guaranteed. Therefore, I will also aspire to have good conditions in future lives. So, for example, at the monastery where I received most of my training, one of the chants that we would commonly do includes a line about how wherever I am born, may I always have an upright mind, a moral mind, a wholesome mind. May I always have a wise mind, a discerning mind. May I always have supportive conditions for practice. So there's that acknowledgement that we might not get it in this lifetime. In fact, let's be realistic, we probably won't. Even if you're the most sincere, diligent monastic in the entire world, you're probably not going to attain enlightenment in this lifetime. Let's just be realistic about it. So it's important to make that aspiration. If I don't attain awakening in this lifetime, may I always have the ideal conditions, the most supportive conditions. And we cultivate that through karma, through laying the groundwork of both ordinary good karma and also wisdom karma and compassion karma. But we also do it through aspiration. So we've spoken a number of times recently about rebirth through aspiration, which we find in a number of suttas. The Buddha mentions in a number of suttas that if one has sufficient good karma, then one can direct oneself to a particular kind of rebirth. So we keep that. We have that aspiration. If I don't attain awakening in this lifetime, may I aspire to have the optimal conditions, the ideal conditions in my next life and in all future lives until I attain awakening. So this is where it's necessary for me to first explain a little bit about Buddhist cosmology, because there's a few things that need to be clarified. First off, recognizing that there are countless worlds, countless world systems, countless universes. So for example, somebody recently asked me about how there's a lot more humans these days than there were a few centuries ago. So this must mean that the lower beings are being reborn as humans. It's like, well, no, not necessarily, because there's countless worlds. So maybe this world has more humans, but other worlds may be experiencing a decreasing of humans. And that's also even assuming that there's such a thing as a perfect balance across all worlds, which is doubtful. It's questionable. So recognizing there are countless worlds, countless world systems, countless universes. The peanut gallery is being distracting. Let's just wait a moment till they settle down. Okay. So, so one thing that we also know from the suttas is that each world system can only have one Sammasambuddha at a time. So this world system had a Sammasambuddha 2,500 years ago. And the next one won't be around for probably quite a while, because a Sammasambuddha can only appear when the Dhamma has been completely forgotten. And I won't go into the details about why. That gets into a side point, which I don't want to spend time on. So the next one, who we know their name will be Maitreya. We don't know when they're going to appear, but we know what's going to happen at some point in the future, maybe in a few thousand years, maybe in a few million years. We don't know. But this world system is not going to have a Sammasambuddha for quite some time. However, since there are countless other world systems, it naturally follows that some of them currently have Sammasambuddhas. So it's reasonable, once again, if we're making our aspiration of if we can't attain awakening in this lifetime, and we want to have ideal conditions in our next lifetime, then the ideal conditions is in a world with a living Sammasambuddha, which means aspiring to be reborn not necessarily in this world, unless you're shooting for when Maitreya is around, but I wouldn't wait if I was you. You don't know how long it's going to be. You don't want to take your risk of getting lost in the meantime. Better is just to aim for one of the other worlds that currently has a Sammasambuddha. That makes life a lot cleaner and simpler. And even if you fall a bit short of the ideal conditions, if you aim for the ideal conditions, hopefully you'll get something at least reasonably decent. But optimal is a world with a living Sammasambuddha. So this is where we start to get into some territory, which gets a bit speculative. So we know, once again, through an understanding of Buddhist cosmology, we know that there's countless world systems. We know that some of them have living Sammasambuddhas. We don't necessarily know their names. So there are, in the Mahayana texts, dozens and dozens of different Buddhas who are named. We don't know where those names come from. Whether they were from Shakyamuni or whether they were from subsequent teachers, whether they were from monastics with psychic powers, or whether they were just from scholars with a lot of time on their hands who decided to be creative. We don't know. And it's totally beside the point. So for example, we have a cat here at the monastery. We call him Stan. Is that his name? Is that what he thinks of himself in his own mind? Not necessarily. There's a Far Side cartoon where a man is introducing his dog to another person. And he says, "Oh, this is my dog Rex." And the caption says, "How we call dogs." And then the next one, the caption is, "How dogs call themselves." And the dog is saying, "I am the Lord destroyer of all chickens, the invader of the neighbor's yard." So the point of this cartoon is saying that whatever name we call another being is not necessarily their actual name. It's not necessarily the name they call themselves. It's not necessarily the name that they're known of in their own circles. So we have a lot of names of Buddhas, names like Ratnasambhava Buddha, Amoghasiddhi Buddha, Akshobhya Buddha, Amitabha Buddha. Are these their actual names? It's totally beside the point. It doesn't matter. These are just designations that we use in order to remind ourselves that there are Buddhas in other worlds, that right at this very moment, there are living Sammasambuddhas. They're not here, but they're there somewhere. And if we don't attain awakening in this lifetime, we can be reborn in their presence, and we can learn the Dhamma with them, practice the Dhamma with them, and attain awakening in their presence. So then once again in the Mahayana text, they go into a tremendous amount of information on the exact characteristics of various Sammasambuddhas and the worlds that they live in. Again, the accuracy of these details is questionable. and completely beside the point anyway. Because it's not the details of the worlds or the details of those Buddhas that's important, but rather, once again, the mere fact that they exist at all. The mere fact that they exist and that their worlds exist. It's also important because in the suttas, the Buddha also points out that different Sammasambuddhas have different degrees of success in their teaching careers. So some Buddhas have many disciples and many of them attain awakening and their teachings remain in the world for a very long time. Other Buddhas, they have very few disciples, very few attain awakening, and their teachings last for only a very short time. So this also gives us an indication that there's tremendous variety among the capabilities of different Buddhas and the conditions of different Buddhas, and the conditions of the beings who are practicing with them. So also making that aspiration, not just to be born in the world of any random Sammasambuddha, but optimally one with the ideal conditions, the most supportive conditions for our practice. Again, though, emphasizing that the power which drives that ability to direct one's rebirth is in fact good karma. So it's not something that happens randomly. It's something which necessitates the cultivation of sila, samadhi, and panya. So we have to cultivate morality, concentration, wisdom in this life. We have to cultivate faith, generosity, and compassion in this life. If we want to have any hope of being born in a world with ideal conditions for practice. So there's a few traditional practices related to aspiring to be reborn in a world with a Sammasambuddha, which are somewhat doubtful in terms of their accuracy. So for example, many people believe that simply reciting the name of a Buddha and having the aspiration to be reborn in their land is sufficient. This is doubtful. Once again, there's the necessity to cultivate the sufficient supporting karma. Just reciting the name of a Buddha is not going to be enough. Nonetheless, reciting the name of a Buddha is something which can be quite helpful. So in the Thai forest tradition, for example, it's very common to recite the name of a Buddha as a practice of cultivating serenity of mind, as a practice of cultivating samadhi, concentration, and also as a practice of constantly reminding oneself of the existence of Buddhas and the good qualities of Buddhas. So reciting the name of, say, Amitabha Buddha or Akshobhya Buddha or Ratnasambhava Buddha or whatever Buddha you have a fancy for, it's a good practice. It's a practice of recollecting the Buddha. So Buddhanusati, as we call it in Pali, the recollection of Buddhas. It's a practice of developing samadhi. That's also great. And it can remind us of our aspiration for enlightenment and our aspiration to always have supportive conditions for Dhamma practice. That's all fine. And once again, we can clearly see how such practices are not in contradiction to the teachings that we find in the Pāli Canon. But we can also see that they're not, in and of themselves, sufficient. If somebody recites Amitabha, Amitabha, Amitabha for their entire life, while also killing and stealing and robbing and lying and so on, they're not going to be reborn in the Pure Land. They're not going to be reborn in the presence of Amitabha. They're going to be reborn in hell. And it's going to be very, very unpleasant. And they're probably going to lose contact with the Dhamma for countless lifetimes. So there is, again, there are some popular beliefs around this practice of aspiring to be reborn in the presence of a Sammasambuddha. There's some popular beliefs which are clearly wrong. And that's one of them. One of them is this belief that simply reciting a Buddha's name is sufficient. It's quite clear that if that was sufficient, that would be violating the rules of karma. That'd be against the principles of karma. But as a supportive condition, reciting the name of a Buddha is clearly a supportive condition and therefore is of benefit. So it's important, as always, to always compare any Dhamma teachings back to the core principles of Dhamma. So any teaching that we receive always needs to be tallied up against everything else the Buddha said. It's not wise to simply take a teaching on faith. It's always wise to carefully consider and examine what elements of the teaching are in line with the Buddhist teachings and what isn't. What's in line with the core principles of Dhamma and what contravenes it. So again, just emphasizing, although certain things can be discarded, another traditional belief which can clearly be discarded is the belief that simply to be reborn in Amitabha's land automatically makes you a non-returner. That once you're born in that land, that you're definitely guaranteed to never fall away from it. So from the perspective of the teachings on karma, that could only be possible if one was already a non-returner at the time of death. So for an ordinary person, if an ordinary person is born in a world with a Sammasambuddha, whether it's Amitabha or anybody else, then if they die without making sufficient progress on the path, then they are not safe. They can be reborn in lower realms. They can fall from that. Simply being in the presence of being born in the presence of a Sammasambuddha is the result of good karma, but it does not guarantee awakening. If one does nothing with that opportunity, then the opportunity fades away and is lost. So that's another example of a traditional belief around Amitabha and other living Sammasambuddhas, which can be safely discarded. So we still need to be very careful to cultivate the necessary samadhi and panya, the necessary mental stability and wisdom in order to attain stability and surety in the Dhamma, in order to attain either the stage of non-returner in the Theravāda system or the stage of non-retrogression in the Mahayana system. We can't just expect that to happen automatically, simply by being born in a certain world system or in the presence of a certain Buddha. We still need to cultivate the causes. So this is one of the overarching principles of the Buddhist teachings, is that everything is causal and conditional. Everything that we experience is the result of causes and conditions which we create through the choices that we make. So if we want to attain certainty of awakening, then we need to create the conditions to have certainty of awakening. We can't just expect it to happen automatically, simply through appearing in a certain world for a period of time. So again, emphasizing once again that the core concepts here, so the existence of Sammasambuddhas in other worlds, the existence of worlds with ideal Dharma practice conditions, the ability to aspire to be reborn in those worlds, and keeping that option, the option of being reborn in those worlds, as a backup plan in case awakening does not occur in this life. All of these are things which can clearly be seen to be in line with the Dhamma as found in all schools of Buddhism, from the Theravāda to the Mahayana to the Vajrayana. These core principles are universally held. I do want to say a little bit more, and then we'll go to questions if there are any. I want to say a little bit more in particular about the teachings on Buddha name recitation or recollection of a Buddha, because I found that there's a lot of misunderstanding around this topic. And a lot of the misunderstanding comes because there are multiple layers of depth to these practices. So the practices of what's commonly called Pure Land Buddhism. And usually only the first most superficial layer is commonly spoken about. So the most superficial layer is simply reciting the name of a Buddha and hoping to be reborn in their Pure Land, hoping to be reborn in their world. It's the most superficial layer. The second stage of practice, which is spoken about as one continues to cultivate the recollection of a particular Buddha, as one continues to cultivate a sense of the aspiration to be born in those conditions, as one continues to cultivate the aspiration for enlightenment, which underlies this wish in the first place, as one continues to cultivate sila, samadhi, and panya in one's everyday life, as one goes throughout one's activities, as one engages in meditation practice and dharma contemplation, then one can start to feel a deep sense of affinity and connection with Buddhas in general, but in particular with the Buddha that one is focusing on. So a sense of affinity with that particular Buddha. The third stage that's spoken about is viewing this world as already being that Buddha's land. So this is one which a lot of contemporary Chan teachers speak about. So instead of aspiring to the Pure Land as though the Pure Land was somewhere else, recognize that we're already in the Pure Land. Recognizing that we already are in good conditions for practice. So recognizing that a lot of it has to do with our perspective. If we think these conditions are not suitable, then they're not. But if we think these conditions are suitable, then maybe they are. So this is another shift which can start to occur as one continues to cultivate this practice of recollecting the Buddhas in other worlds, cultivating a sense of connection and affinity with those Buddhas in their worlds. Then one can also start to recognize that one is already in a world with okay conditions. Maybe not ideal, but not too bad. Not too bad. And it's said that as one continues this practice, then one can experience the feeling that one is already in the world of ideal conditions. And then finally, the fourth stage is recognizing that one's own mind is inseparable from the mind of the Buddha that one is focusing on. And therefore, from the mind of all Buddhas. Since, once again, we talk about different Buddhas, but ultimately all Buddhas have the same essential qualities. The same essential Buddha mind. So through cultivating this connection with the Buddha mind, through the image of one particular Buddha, the thought of one particular Buddha, one is starting to cultivate a sense that the Buddha is not something external to ourselves, but rather the Buddha is an aspect of our own mind, which we can tune into, which we can cultivate, which we can build up as a felt, lived experience. So this is also, once again, an indication that the practice of what's commonly called Pure Land Buddhism, which is the practice of reciting the name of a particular Buddha and aspiring to be in their presence. It's also a practice of coming to recognize the Buddha nature within ourselves. It's coming to recognize that the Buddha is not outside of us. It's not 2,500 years ago. It's not in some other universe, but the Buddha mind is something which is ever present. It's something which is all pervasive. And it's something which is pervasive in our own mind as well. So within our own mind are the same Buddha qualities that are found in every Sammasambuddha. It's simply through a lack of proper attention that we fail to recognize the Buddha qualities within ourselves. It's through a lack of proper conduct that we get wrapped up in unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome speech, and unwholesome action, instead of the thought, speech, and action of a Buddha. So through constantly directing one's mind to a Buddha, one can start to recognize that Buddha nature within oneself as a felt experience, as a lived experience. So these are a few thoughts that I wanted to share with this evening. So hopefully, for those of you who are diehard Orthodox Theravadins, hopefully I've softened your attitudes towards Pure Land at least a little bit. For those of you who were already into Pure Land, I hope I've given you a deeper appreciation for it and also nailed home the importance of practicing hard in this lifetime. Don't give up. You can do it. It's difficult, but it's possible. And also, the harder we practice in this lifetime, the more likely we are to be reborn in a Pure Land if that's what we want. And the more slack we are with our practice in this lifetime, the less likely we are to be reborn in a Pure Land, no matter how strong our faith is, no matter how strong our aspiration is. If our practice is weak, we're not getting there. Kind of like if you get in a car and you have the faith it's possible to drive to Chicago. You have the aspiration. I really want to drive to Chicago, but the car is broken. Well, good luck. You need to have a good functioning vehicle if you want to get anywhere. So don't give up on practicing in this lifetime, because without practicing in this lifetime, there is no entering the Pure Land, there is no entering the presence of a Buddha, and there is no attaining awakening anywhere in any form. And of course, if you didn't like anything I said just now, well, too bad, it's Buddhism. If you have issues, please bring them up in the questions and comments, and I'll address them as best I can. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And welcome to a couple more friends joining in, Jacqueline, Chandrani, and Maitreya, and Madhavi.
Oh, Maitreya joined in? That's auspicious.
And John says, it seems like Ajahn Stan is enjoying the ideal conditions.
Well, he's more interested in trying to break everybody else's ideal conditions.
And Maitreya T asks, how do we know with strong confidence that we have the sufficient karma to ensure that our aspiration for the next rebirth is successful?
Well, that's the thing. If you have to ask, then that means you don't. In which case, practice harder. So there are people who they reach a point where they have absolute confidence, where that sense of connection is so incredibly strong that they have absolute confidence that they'll be reborn in one of the Pure Lands. Most people don't have that. So if you don't have that, well, you're not there yet. So practice hard. That's a reminder of how shaky and uncertain and unstable our conditions are, and the importance of cultivating stronger conditions. Keep building up your faith. Keep building up your morality. Keep building up your samadhi. Keep building up your wisdom. This is how we develop that certainty, that surety. Because there is no certainty until we pass a certain stage in our practice. Again, in the Theravāda system, it's the stage of non-returner. Actually, the stage of stream entry is sufficient. And in the Mahayana system, it's the stage of non-retrogression. So until we reach that point, there's no certainty. We can keep wandering in samsara, lost and confused for eons. So if you don't have that certainty, you're not there yet. Keep practicing. Okay.
And they also ask, when you mention awakening, are you referring to Sotapanna or Arahant?
So both can properly be called awakening. Sometimes we make a distinction of complete awakening, which would refer to an arhat, and stages of awakening, including the earlier breakthroughs as well. So I don't recall what I meant at the particular time, but I would say awakening in general can be thought to include any of the irreversible stages of progress. Because all of those are, again, points of certainty, certainty of eventually attaining full awakening. So ultimately it winds up being the same. It's like if you grab one end of a stick, you've got the other end of the stick as well. So it's the same. Once you grab stream entry, then Arhat is just around the corner.
And Mark asks, I think you once mentioned that a stream enterer can never backslide. Is this accurate?
It's clearly mentioned in the suttas, yeah. So it should be clarified, though, by saying they can never backslide, what's meant by that is that they can never lose their status of stream entry. So they can never lose the wisdom that they've gained, which has led to breaking the first three fetters. This doesn't mean that a stream enterer can't be lazy. They can. So this is clearly mentioned actually in the Ratana Sutta. It mentions that stream enterers can be a little bit lazy. And actually sometimes the reason this happens is because one attains stream entry and there's that sense of relief. Like, oh, at last. But then after a little while, since one has already cultivated such incredibly strong faith and confidence, then that forms the driving impetus which keeps one moving towards awakening. But along the way, sometimes mistakes are made. So stream enterers also can sometimes do minor wrongs. This is also clearly mentioned in a number of places in the suttas. But they would never do anything major. So they might do slightly unwholesome things, but they'd never do anything major. Okay.
All right. And that was the last question so far. So if anyone has any last minute thoughts, feel free to type them in. If not, definitely join us tomorrow morning. Ayasoma will be sharing a sutta with us and discussing it. And then in the evening, I will be giving a talk as well on how to get rich with the Dhamma. Stay tuned.
I must have missed that lesson since I'm dead broke. It's like net worth 0.
Lucas actually has a question. He says, is stream entry a byproduct of meditation? I've been pondering on this one for a long time.
Depends on what you mean by meditation. If by meditation you mean the cultivation of wholesome qualities, then yes. And if by meditation you mean sitting down cross-legged on a cushion for a few minutes, then I would have to say no, not necessarily. So it depends on what you mean by meditation. Okay.
And Chandra Sekhar, sorry, the cat. Chandra Sekhar says, is seeing the Dhamma and practicing the Dhamma the same?
That's an interesting question. So normally when I hear the phrase seeing the Dhamma, I think of having some direct realization of the truth of the Dhamma in some detail or some aspect or some characteristic. So practicing the Dhamma is learning the Dhamma and trying to live in accordance with it, trying to experience it, trying to do what it's talking about. And every now and then we get a deep sense of it. So for example, you learn about impermanence, you learn that everything is impermanent, and you think, okay, I want to actually feel that for myself. I want to see that for myself. So then you cultivate some samadhi and you bring up the intention to see everything in your experience as impermanent. That's practicing the Dhamma. When all illusion of solidity and substantiality melts away, that's seeing the Dhamma. And there's stages of that. So you can have little glimpses, and those glimpses can become more frequent, more intense, more deep, until eventually you can have a complete breakthrough. And usually when we talk about breakthrough, we're talking about stream entry. So the first irreversible stage of awakening. But also sometimes we make sudden, rapid progress in our practice. And that's the result of all the past conditions that we've developed, all the past causes that have led to our present supportive conditions. Okay.
Seems like you've piqued people's interest with stream entry. So Mark asks, can one attain stream entry just by cultivating good qualities and no meditation?
Depends what you mean by meditation once again. So cultivating good qualities is meditation. Meditation is cultivating good qualities. That said, without the cultivation of samadhi, it is very difficult to develop deep wisdom. And samadhi is very difficult to develop without practicing meditation. So I would say technically you can attain stream entry without meditation, but realistically you can't. Okay.
And Ned asks, will a stream winner necessarily be aware of his or her own gain?
Yes, without doubt. This is very clear in the suttas. If you're a stream enterer, you know it with absolute certainty. You're more certain of it than you've ever been certain of anything. Yeah, this is very, very clear in the suttas.
Okay. And that was the last question, it seems.
We have a live question.
What about faith followers in attaining Sotapanna on faith?
So that's a very interesting subject, which I've pondered on over the years. So faith followers are, they're described in a very small number of places in the suttas and not in any detail. And that appears to be a stage before stream entry. So there's the faith follower and the Dhamma follower. So one whose practice is built upon faith, and the other whose practice is built upon wisdom. And because there's so little information about them in the suttas, there's a lot of debate about their characteristics and qualities. The Buddha gave a lot of information about stream enterers, very little about faith followers and Dhamma followers. So yeah, I can't answer for sure. There's just not enough information about it. Anything else? Okay.
Mark has another question. So do stream enterers just know this stream entry and don't need any confirmation, or do they need confirmation from a teacher?
They do not need confirmation. One of the definitions of a stream enterer is that they are not reliant upon anybody else. Aparapachaya. They have no reliance on another. So they know for themselves. They don't need a teacher to tell them. In fact, if you're a teacher and somebody comes to you asking if they're a stream enterer, that's pretty much a solid guarantee that they aren't. Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, Bhante Ji would say that. He says, if you ask me if you're a stream enterer, you're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We'll be back tomorrow as well as Friday. And if you're in the area, on Sunday between 10 and 5, we'll be having our Katina ceremony. So join us then if you can. It's basically a party for all involved. Yeah, it's a Dhamma party. There's food, there's talks.
Okay.
Noble friendship.
I've never heard it called that before, but sure, you can call it a party.
So come if you're in the area. Yeah, and check out our website for all the updates for upcoming events and live streams. So we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
All right, and have a great night.